Howdy, it's Matt, and in this episode we're going to be installing our flight controller board, which is a Omnibus F4 V2 board, into a flying wing. Now, there is something which has concerned me a little bit. I did post earlier today in the Facebook group that this episode was ready. However, some of the comments did kind of concern me. So what I'm going to do right now, I'm just going to go over the basics. I know that we've done this once before, but I want this to be 100% clear with you, because if you connect even a little 2S battery to your flight controller board and get the wiring wrong, then you're going to get magic pixie smoke, and I would hate for that to happen. So that's why we're going to go through the basics here, and then we'll go on and look at the install of one of these flight controller boards into a flying wing. So with that said, let's move along, and this is going to be much quicker than what you've been used to before. So I'm just going to have a quick wander around the board just to make sure you're 100% comfortable with the connections. So let's start with S-Bus. So this first connector there, we're going to put our receiver connector on there. Nice and straightforward, so we've seen that before. Then when it comes to our ESC, that goes in PWM1. Now, why do we know, or how do we know that it needs to go into PWM1? Well, iNav told us that, and I'll put a little picture up on your screen so that you know your servo connections. This one is being set up for a flying wing, the purpose of this series, and we know that PWM1 and 2 are for the motors. Now, wing servo, or elevon, the left elevon is PWM3, and the right elevon, again looking from the rear of the model, is PWM4. So I've just been and coloured those on the screen, so we're covering the basics. I just want you to feel 100% confident in what you're doing. When it comes to connecting up the GPS, well, I showed you how to do that in a previous episode, so if you haven't seen that episode yet, in the top right hand corner there is a link to that episode, and you just basically plug in your GPS connector into J10, which is right next to the PWM outputs. Now when it comes to your FPV system, is that there's two roads which you need to be aware of. The first one is ground, so that's looking on top of the board like we've got here. The two ground pins are to the left towards the middle of the board, and then when it comes to the video signal in from our FPV camera, that needs to go onto this pin here. So V in is our video in from our FPV camera, and then V out, which is that pin there, that is the yellow wire or whatever colour wire you're using, which then goes on to your video transmitter. Now I do need to change the colours on this one to make it like completely transparent, which is when it comes to connecting up your power system to your board, is that your battery goes into where it says, and then that's where you connect your battery in. Then from the other pad, which is labelled Moto VCC, you then take that on to your speed controller. Obviously on the bottom of the board you've got a ground wire which you've been connected up as well. Now I also need to say that I made a mistake, and I'm going to put my hands up on this, and I didn't realise until, well, she sat over there and I went, servos aren't working. I made a mistake. These flight controller boards don't actually power the servos. So when you connect your ESC in, and again it will vary from board to board, I'm only focused on the F4 V2 boards and the V3 board, is that you'll see me unpicking the ESC wire, and actually the reality is you don't need to do that and you can plug it straight in, but just be 100% aware, you do need to be aware of that. It may differ from one flight controller to another, so that's a little mistake which I made, and I'll point that out to you as we go through and install the flight controller board into our wing. So anyway, that's enough of the intro. I just wanted to cover the basics so you know why I am sticking things in different places. This is a longer episode than normal. Remember, this is a step-by-step guide. This is so you can follow along with me with your install of iNav and your flight controller board, specifically a F4 V2 board, into your flying wing. So with that said, let's get across to the desk and I'll see you there. Howdy, it's Matt, and in this episode we are going to be installing an F4 V, technically a V3 board, but it's the same pinout as a V2 board, into a FX-61 Phantom flying wing. Now do note the wiring here is slightly different compared to a V1 board, but with that said, let's move on. And what you're about to find out is that this is really straightforward to do if you prepare beforehand. Now do note, I am recording this on the iPad, so it is going to be a little bit shaky from time to time and the audio is not going to be amazeballs, but it's good enough so that you can see what's going on. Now before we put anything into the model itself, there's a couple of things which I need to make a point to you about. The first thing is that I've been and made a platform which I had already had for my FX-61, and you'll see that I'm using some of these little, I think what they call duplex little connectors. I'll put a link to those in the video description for you, and those are going to be, that's where we're going to be mounting the board up on top, and that's what we're going to be using to secure it into our model, and this obviously then goes on and fits into our model itself. When it comes to the board itself, you'll notice what I've got here. So let me just make sure this is in focus for you. There we go. So we've got the flight controller board and we've got the arrow pointing forward. So we're going to have the S-bus and the servo PWM channels pointing towards the front of the model. You'll also note that, well, a big point to note is the USB socket is that it's going to be easily accessible, and that's one thing which I will cover in a later video on how to change the orientation of the board. But for right now, I'm going to assume that you've got great access to the USB connector just in case you want to change your settings later. When it comes to the wiring, you'll notice that underneath I've got black cables which I've got a little Y split on there. So we have our battery coming in here. So the black wire comes up and it gets soldered onto the bottom of the board just there. And then we've got that again going on to our ESC wire. If we turn it up the other way, is that again we've got our positive coming from our battery and it comes into BAT plus on our board, and then it comes out of the motor one on the opposite side, and then that goes around to our ESC. You'll also notice that I have got a JST connector hanging off there for something which I might use later on, maybe some LED lighting strip for example. And then I've got another set of wires just here as well with two male connectors on the end and a toroid coil as well. Now the reason why I've got one of those coils on there is because these two connectors here are going to be essentially be used for FPV, and I want to keep the noise down as much as possible. Also on the bottom of the board you may have noticed that little white wire hanging out the bottom. Again, I'll show you how to do this in a later episode. That is the RSSI connector which I've got on the bottom of there. Absolute ball bag to solder it, and I've put some goop glue on the bottom just to cover over the board, just to hold the cable down. Of course you could use a little bit of hot glue if you wanted. So that's the board itself. I've got two more of those connectors. Now instead of using the screws to hold the board down, is that if you use these, is that it makes taking the board in and out an awful lot easier. So you'll see what I mean about those in a few moments time. And then also I've got a separate little loom here, nothing very exciting. All I'm doing is these two wires here are ground and video. So we're going to have video in on one of them, video out on the other. We've got the power coming in from one of the power connectors which we had on our other loom. And then we've got two standard connectors on here which I will use, one which will go to the video transmitter with the AV out on, and we've got one here which we can then just connect straight up to our FPV camera. Now by the way, a note here is that I am assuming that your FPV camera can take full voltage from your flight battery pack. I will be using an immersion RC video transmitter, and I'll be using a run cam, so I know both of those can take full 12 volts or more in. So that's the little loom which I'm using. So let me just go move these parts over here to one side, and let's go and get this installed. Now one thing which you will notice is that I've been and got myself prepared. Now to give you a quick heads up, what I've got is that I've already been and installed the GPS unit over here on the side, and there's the cables hanging out there already. I do have a receiver right down on the opposite wing, which is the L9R, so it's just like the X8R in many ways, in short, but is that we do need to connect up the RSSI to that because the XSR, sorry, the L9R doesn't support telemetry. Anyway, Moving around, so we've got a GPS, we've got our right servo wire here, which will be going on to PWM4. Then we've got these connectors here. So that connector just there is for our S-bus. That one there is for our RSSI. On the opposite side, we have the other servo connector, which I'm just using a bit of masking tape to hold them out of the way to make it easier to show you. And then on this side, with the white lead is actually audio, which I won't be using. And then we've got black and red, which is the power supply for the video transmitter. And then yellow, or the orange color, that's our AV out, which then goes onto our video transmitter. And the only component which we are missing from this install was actually an FPV camera, and the reason for that is that I need to dig my Runcam Eagle out of Suicide Bunny, and I'll mount that on the front, and then I'm sure you've seen those before. It's just a straight one of those little connectors like those, one of those little servo connectors which comes out the back of the Runcam, and we'll be able to plug that in. So first things first, let's go and get our board installed. So you'll notice that I am just pushing that cable down the back, out the way, and of course I've already been on and made the wiring loom for these, so it's really nice because I can actually just show you an install in real life. And let me just get that first one in, and you'll see now what I was saying about the fun using these bigger connectors, the mounting ones. And again, if you're a quad pilot, I'm sure you've probably got a couple of these kicking around. It just makes it much easier. Instead of trying to get a screwdriver out, I don't need, and you don't need, any tools to be able to do this. You can just screw it straight in. So let's go with the obvious one first. I'm going to go and grab the GPS connector, and I'm going to get that plugged in. Now I need to make sure that's the right way round. I think the pins are on the top, and apologies, my hand's going to be in the way of that, but I'm going to make sure that's in. And you'll notice that in the board which I've got here, you'll see that there's some holes already pre-drilled in here. We'll be talking about the neatness of an install in a few moments time. And also, actually, before I forget, you'll notice that I've 3D printed out a Naca duct for the lid as well. One thing which you do want to ensure is that this is a flight controller which does generate quite a chunk of heat. Okay, if we put it in this nice little foam enclosure, it's going to get lovely and toasty and warm inside the model. So do be very aware of cooling of your flight controller board, to the point that I have cut out a Naca duct in there, and you can see how much air that's going to scoop in there. That's absolutely fantastic. So we're going to get lots of fresh air in on top of our board, especially if you're going to be flying for extended periods of time, then cooling is a big factor. Right, let's move that one out of the way. So we've done the GPS, that was easy. Now let's go and do S-bus. So let me move this around here. So S-bus was that connector there, and as we learned in a previous part of this series, is that that goes into PWM1. So I need to make sure that goes in there all right. There we go. And I'm just going to tuck that over and out the way. And I am being neat with this because it's my model, and ultimately this model is going to be flying above my head. So I am going to take some time to do that. Now the one thing which you may or may not be doing is connecting up an RSSI wire. Now if you're using the V1 board, that part is really straightforward for you because it's just one of the pins on the top. That's why I was recommending the V1 boards, because they are much easier to wire up, whereas this one I've had to solder on the pad and things like that underneath the board. Right, that now brings us on to servos. Now I need to start with, and again you'll know this from, remember that diagram in iNav, it said on the left, servo number 3, or PWM number 3, was our left wing. So looking at the model from behind, that's our left wing. So I'm going to take that servo connector and I'm going to put that in what is, in my case, the second one across on the right. So that's PWM 3. I'm just going to make sure that wire's over there nice and neatly. Again, I will be putting cable ties around this board. And then let's go and do the next servo. So we can get some of this masking tape up out of the way. And that was our other servo, and that's PWM 4. And we're going to plug that in there now. That now brings us nicely onto our ESC. So I've already got our ESC connected. So it's already on there. I assume it's going to go the right way around. I am just going to poke that down the back. I'm going to connect that up. Now, one thing which I have not done is, because I'm using a V2 board, is that when we don't, that positive wire, which is in the middle of the servo connector, is that we don't want them conflicting. So what I'm going to quickly just do is unpick, and I hope you can see this on here, and again I'm leaving this as raw as I can. You're going to have to excuse my fingers, by the way. I'm covered in goop glue because I was working on a model at about 3 o'clock this morning and it's still stuck to my hands. Anyway, let's move that out of the way. Now we do need to put some tape over that so that to make sure it's not going to short out on anything. And I can see some Kapton tape. So of course you could just use sellotape. I've got some Kapton tape here, which is normally my preferred tape for anything electronics. Now, if you don't know what I'm talking about, I will show you on the screen in just a moment. So sellotape would work, but I do have some Kapton tape here as well, which is high temperature electrical insulation tape. I'm sure if you've got a 3D printer, you'll probably recognise it. And I bought a roll of it absolutely ages ago. So I am just going to tuck that cable back out the way, and I'm just going to secure it around nice and safely, because we don't want that 5 volts just dangling around anywhere. And we need to put that one onto PWM1, which is the second set of pins across. Again, I know my hand's going to be in the way, apologies for that. I will show you, I will get the iPad up and I'll show you the wiring up afterwards. In fact, why don't I just do that now? There you go. I'll pick the iPad up, there we go. So this, hopefully that's going to focus in. So all I've done, we've got S-bus, which is hiding on that first pin just there. And again, like I said, I am using the iPad, so it's going to be a little bit shaky. I do apologise. Then we've got the second one is our ESC. Then we've got servo, the PWM4, PWM3, which is our left wing servo, and then PWM4, which is our right wing servo, and we have our GPS getting plugged in there, and then we had our RSSI hiding up underneath, and I've just been in half connected up the ESC. So let's go and get you sat back down there. Oh, of course I've plugged in the ESC. I will tidy that up in a few moments time. Next section which we're going to move on to is the powering of the FPV camera and the video transmitter. So this is where that wiring loom comes in. It looks a bit scary, but you'll notice that I've just got 2 wires going off here, a yellow and a brown, which is, so that's video and then ground. And then we need to connect those up. So again, this will differ upon the 2 different boards which you've got. Now, I need to go and just quickly check, and this is a big point. I'm going to leave this in because I'm going to walk across to my desk and make sure that the outside one is video out. So this one here on the outside, let me just untangle my wires. That one there on the V2 board is video out. So that's what I want to connect the video transmitter to, which is that one there. Get that the right way round. There we go. And then this one here is the video in. So that's going to go onto our run cam, which would be sat on the lid of the model. So I will put a cable tie down there just to strap it on so it's in there nice and securely. And then we're left with one other cable, which is our power. And like I said, that power and loom, which we looked at the beginning, I'm going to connect that up and then just poke that in around the side. So hopefully this doesn't look like a complete bird's nest now. We've got video out just there, that runs round, and then that will go all the way across the wing to the video transmitter, which needs to get plugged in on its left wing. And then we've got this other cable just here, which will plug the run cam wires in because they just got a standard servo connector. And that's it, believe it or not. Now, a couple of points, a couple of daft ones. I am going to reiterate the cooling piece, okay? Flight control boards, they do generate heat. You need to make sure that there is a decent amount of airflow inside your model. If you are in any doubt, do what I've done. And I'll put a link to the Naca duct, which I've used on mine, in the video description. Make sure you have plenty of cooling. The last thing which you want to do is keep an ESC and a flight controller board all yummy, nice and warm, nice and cozy inside a well-insulated model. You need airflow inside of your model. I was concerned about mine, so I've made sure that there's plenty of airflow in there. What I'm also now going to go and do is that I'm going to go and get some cable ties out, and I'm going to, or zip ties if you're in the United States, you may know them by, and I'm going to zip tie all these cables down so they are all held in there nice and securely. The other note as well is that this flight controller board is hopefully in there straight, and it's also in there level. I know it's going to be pretty much level because I've run an EagleTree Vector in this one before, and it needed very, very little dirt. When we leveled it, it was pretty much level, you know, so I'm pretty sure that's as level as I can make it. That said, do keep in the back of your mind, you do want to be placing these flight controller boards as level for flight conditions as possible. So that means that it's level in the, whatever the attitude of the model is in the sky, it needs to be level with that. And again, you may have to, yeah, you can tweak the settings in iNav, but I would strongly suggest from the outset, just make sure that your board is level as far as the attitude of the model, how level it is in the sky. So you can imagine that flying forwards, is that board is in there as level as I can make it. And you'll see that I have made a little mezzanine or like a platform for it to sit on, especially for a flight controller, so I can stick a great big battery. And I'm here just looking to see if I've got one. Yeah. So you imagine we're up there flying in the sky. Well, on the flight line, we stick our flight pack in there. It goes in underneath there. I can connect the battery up really easily just here on the side. That's why I have that longer cable. We can plug her in just there. The ESC will be sat at the back, and jobs are good. And so by the magic of video editing, I will be back to you now. So ta-da! There is the finished article. Let's take a closer look. So I'm just going to get the iPad out of the stand so you can see what I've been and done with my setup. So I just want to quick reiterate, we have the L9R, which is just like an X8R FR Sky receiver out on one wing, out on the right wing. We will have the video transmitter out on the opposite wing. Again, you kind of get the idea of how paranoid I am about the distance between a receiver and a video transmitter. We've got the GPS, again, well out of the way of any of the other major components, including the flight controller and the ESC and the battery itself. The GPS wires, they go down underneath the wing, they pop out down here, and then let's have a quick walk around the wiring. I think I'll tell you what, let's start with the power first. So I am just going to repeat myself. We have the power, that's where our battery connects in. So we've got our main battery pack here. It is looped around on that side on purpose, so that we can connect our battery up. That does loop round onto the board, comes back out, and then it goes into our ESC. We are tapping off full pack voltage as well for our video transmitter on the side of the wing and for our FPV camera as well. We've got, like I said, we've got our GPS unit being plugged in there, and again that's in there the right way round, and that's in there nice and neatly. We've got some cable ties just holding the wires down. We've got RSSI coming in, that's what that white wire is there. We've got our S-bus on the first pin as well, and you'll notice that all the colour pins are on the top. So the white or the yellow wires, they're on the top of these connectors. So S-bus goes into the first one. The second one is our ESC. And remember, I unpinned the 5 volts, the middle connector out of here, because this board, we're not powering via the ESC. The board can power itself. And of course the servos too. Then we've got PWM3, which is the second one in from the right hand side on this board. That goes to our left elevon. And then for the right one, we've got, that's our other servo connector there. I've got those cable tied down really nicely. I was also a little bit paranoid. I've got plenty of slack in these cables, and I've got another cable tied just holding the ground and the mains pack power leads in onto the main spar itself. You'll also notice here on the Phantom FX-61, I've left some space free here so the lid will actually close down on it itself. Then on the opposite side, we've got video out and video in. There's that shared ground which I mentioned about, and then we've got the connector here for the FPV camera. It's just got standard male servo connector lead on the end of it. We'll be able to plug that in there. And again, I've put the restrainer on that one because what I found before my previous install is that you imagine you've got the camera sat on the front of there and you've got the lead hanging out, is that you always had to like just twist it round. Whereas that if it's a servo connector like that, I can unplug it, put the lid right out the way, work on the middle of the model, and then when I go to fly, plug the connector in, and then I've got the FPV sorted. And then talking about the other part of the FPV, the cable comes out there, runs out all the way along the wing to the blank hole which I've got right now, but that's where the video transmitter will be. So that's the install of a V2 board onto the Phantom FX-61, which is also known as the Phantom. And personally, I'm really happy about this because, in fact, let me just put this camera back down so it's not so shaky, is that I'm really excited about this because Vectors are so bloody expensive. And like I said, I own 3 EagleTree Vectors and they're £175 each. And they do come up from time to time on sale, or like on sale on eBay, for example, from somebody who's owned one before, but you never really know what you're getting with it. You don't really know if it's going to work, and the only right way of doing it is buying a brand new one, and it's 175 quid or like $230. This route, what's it cost me? Actually, technically in this case, that board was £32 because that's the one from Unmantech, but that aside, what we're talking normally, what are they, 15 quid? $15 or $20, something like that. An extra cable, which we had to buy in a GPS unit, which was $20. So what we're talking, $40, give or take a few pennies, you know? Absolute corking bargain to have flight controller software like this on a shoestring budget. So this is the one which I will be continuing on with, and we'll go out and see this made in. I haven't flown this model in absolutely ages. I cannot wait to get this one up and flying with iNav. This is my big just cruiser in the sky for FPV. In fact, let me just pull out here on the camera and you'll like appreciate just the sheer size of it. It's a 61-inch wing span on it. It's absolutely massive, and just a big kitten in the sky. Very, very enjoyable. So hopefully the iPad doesn't fall over. Like I said, it might be a bit shaky. I do apologise. But with that said, that's the install of the V2 board into the Phantom FX-61. I will do a separate video for a V1 board as well, but for now, you've kind of, there's 3 things you need to take away. Number 1, ensure that you've got plenty of cooling for your flight controller board and for the inside of your model. Take that away as number 1. Number 2, when it comes to the actual wiring itself, we're not learning anything new here. This is what we covered in the previous parts of the series on iNav. We've just put all those things together. And the last thing which we learned here as well, keep your wiring nice and neat. Okay, couple of zip ties or cable ties. They only like cost £1 or something like that from your local hardware store. You can buy them on eBay, Amazon, wherever you kind of know. Keep it all nice and neat. And with that said, if you have any questions about this install, please just ask. You can do that in the comments section underneath this video. And with that said, I need to go and nick the Runcam Eagle out of the Suicide Bunny. And I'm going to get that mounted in there. We'll just make sure the CG's right on it. Yeah, she's ready for a maiden. Happy days in anybody's book. So for myself, Matt, as always, cheerios! So fantastic, we've been and got our flight controller board installed into our wing, and we've seen that I've been super neat and tidy with the wiring and made sure everything is nice and restrained. That's happy days. Now don't go and take your model to the flight line and lob it in the air just yet. The reason why I'm saying that is because in the next part of this series we are going to make sure that the elevons move in the right direction. And why is that important? Well, why does that sound daft? It's actually really, really important. The reason being is chances are your elevons, or if you've set this up for a fixed wing model which has got ailerons, rudder and an elevator, is chances are some of those surfaces are going to be moving in the wrong directions. And that will mean that when you go up, and it may be work off your transmitter, it may be fine in pass-through mode, but when you chop your model in the sky and you go and turn it into, say, horizon mode, a stabilized mode, is that your model may spin on you, and I would hate for that to happen. So what we're going to do is, in the next part of this series, we're going to make sure that our elevons, in this case for a flying wing, and of course it means it's exactly the same process for other fixed wing models, is that we're just going to make sure that everything moves in the right direction. And good news, this is really simple to do with the iNav configurator, and all you're going to be doing is just moving your model around and just making sure that the surfaces move in the right direction when you're in a stabilized mode. So happy days, we're almost there. I'll see you in the next part of this series. From myself, Matt, cheerios.